Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Emerald Planet. All the ecology news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's your host, Executive Director of the Emerald Planet, Dr. Sam Lee Hancock.
Hello and welcome to the Emerald Planet as we come to you on a week-to-week basis from Washington, D.C. and the United States. Looking around the globe in 144 different nations, looking for those 1,000 best practices, the technologies, services, and products that will take us through the 21st century. And as we look to a planet that will have about 9 billion people by 2038, how are we going to be able to take care of all these people? And at the same time, how do we communicate with people so that they actually know what's going on and how that they can connect and be a part of the future? And I have a gentleman sitting right beside me that's actually doing quite a few of those things. This is Robert W. Mines. He's the founder of what's called the World Press Photo Exhibits in D.C. and also CEO of the D.C. Underground. And Robert, welcome.
Thank you, Sam. It's good to be back.
Well, looking at the photography as a way to communicate and the Internet of Things and big data and all that, why is the World Press Photo in the 21st century so important, the images?
Well, my background, as you know, is I'm a policy analyst. So I write 28-page documents that nobody ever reads. I learned fairly quickly, though, that an image can communicate much more effectively than a long document. It hits you in the gut, and it makes people think about the issues that are in the images. And that's basically something that's so transformative. That's what we want to concentrate on. Showing people images that make them think and learn more about the topics.
Yeah. Looking at this, I mean, some of these sites that we're going to be looking at here is really magnificent. And we're going to talk about the World Press Photo as a best practice itself. Then we'll get into the photographs as well. But, you know, as a best practice, World Press Photo really has some magnificent venues to really reach to the public wherever it may be. So tell us a little bit about the background of World Press Photo. Why is that so important, and how does it reach to the publics that may not be able to reach before?
Sure. Well, World Press Photo was founded in 1955 by a small group of Dutch photographers. And as you might be able to hear from my accent, I am Dutch. But it started with a small group and has grown out to be an exhibition that travels all around the world, that visits 100 different cities all across the globe. 4 million people see the exhibition every year. And it's effectively the Oscars of photojournalism. Mm-hmm. And I love that combination of not just being an awards organization, but taking the images that come out of that and sharing them with the world.
Yeah, looking at these images, I mean, these are really magnificent. And some of these are actually, really huge. Some of them are very dark and stirring. Others are light and bubbly and lovely, and everything in between, because you're really exhibiting the world.
Yeah. But
these are the top photojournalists, in the world that are doing this. So what attracts them about being in the World Press Photo?
Well, I mean, for them, it's receiving that award is the height of their, is the height of their professional accomplishment. But one thing that I often say about the photojournalists that I've worked with is that those who often receive the award, the first thing that they'll do is deflect from the award and go back to the topic that they were talking about in the images themselves. It's sort of the nature of photojournalists to be behind the camera telling someone else's story, which means that you get incredibly thoughtful people who are taking these images, and people who understand the stories much better than you or I.
Now, looking at this, we're integrating music into this, and I've been to some of the ones that you've actually created here in Washington, D.C., and it's really a total sensory process. And so you're tantalizing the ears, the eyes, even the taste buds, the sense of feel, touch, because you really can get close, as you can see in this mm-hmm. photograph here, to these photos. So how does these photos speak to people in a way that's different if it's unless it's on the internet, it's on television, maybe in a magazine?
Sure.
How is this different? Because, when you got 4 million people coming out, something attracts.
Well, one of the great things about the venue, the DuPont Underground, is that it's an abandoned trolley station underneath DuPont Circle. You take 13 steps down and you go from the center of Washington, D.C. to this completely barren space. It's an echoey space, there's no one down there, and it's just you and the photograph. Mm-hmm. You take an active choice to go see the photograph, and you have to decide when you move away from it. But there's no cat video that's going to take your attention to the side of the screen. There's no simple click to move something back and forth. You absorb the photograph much more deeply, than you would if you're clicking through something online. And I think that really changes the perception. And you hear that time and time again from visitors who say, you know, I'm so used to consuming this kind of material in the newspaper or on a screen, and this is a totally different way of doing things.
And the whole thing about it, you know, people literally can just walk up and almost put their nose as far as the photographs themselves are concerned. So, and you have a mix as far as different topics, and also you actually mix some of the years, so you'll have much earlier photographs going back to earlier days, the 60s and 70s, even early 80s. Why that mix?
Well, we want to show the history of World Press Photo and the history of photography. So we have on the inside track the photos of the year, all the way from 1955 to the current day, as well as the photographs that won awards for their stories over the last year. And I think that way you put things in historical context, and you understand that for each of those photographs of the year, there's an exhibition like the one that you're seeing, telling so many different stories of what happened in the world that year. And that gives you that sense of richness and history that you just can't convey by having all the photographs there.
Yeah. And this whole thing too about having this up close and personal experience with these photographs, as you were saying, is something very different, because you can stand there and you see some people that are at a photograph and you know you're wandering through, you come back 30 minutes later, they're still there.
Yeah.
So how do people become that interactive with a particular photograph or a particular theme in this kind of venue that's large? There's a lot of people moving about.
Yeah.
There's noise in the background, in many cases, but yet they're just wrapped into that photograph or that theme. What creates that?
Well, I think it's one of the wonderful ways that World Press Photo designs these exhibitions. It's not nature photography, it's not conflict photography, it's a mix of everything. There's sports in there, portraiture. You come to see the photographs that you're used to, and then out of the corner of your eye you'll see something that is completely new to you. And at first you go, hey, this is interesting, let me take a second look. And you automatically strike up a conversation with the person next to you, and you'll see little details in the photographs that you wouldn't necessarily see if you didn't take the time to look at something. So you will have people who spend 15 minutes looking at just one photograph.
Yeah, you know, last year I actually timed it because someone was so wrapped in the photograph, you could just tell it was a physical connection there. 30 minutes later, as I was coming back up, they were still at that same photograph. And it's magnificent, some of these venues that you have. This one's from the Middle East. This is just absolutely incredible. Multiple floors. And so it allows people to spread out. They can have their own intimate time. So how do they go about as far as selecting the venues? And is it again for that particular culture, or is it just vary year to year as far as what may be available?
Well, World Press Photo is a small organization based in Amsterdam, and they've got less than 30 staff members. So what they do is they work with organizations like ours, in our case the Dupont Underground in Washington, who want to exhibit the photographs. Somebody will come from World Press Photo, set up the exhibition, but it's largely up to the organizations in the different cities to decide what the venues are, of course with approval from World Press.
Right.
But it's a partnership that comes from both sides.
Looking at this and looking at all these, and this goes back to this historical link that you're talking about, what are people getting out of that? Because you think you're in the 21st century, we're moving forward as far as heading towards 2038, 9 billion people on the planet, 2050, maybe the tipping point as far as the climate change is concerned. Yet, what are they learning from the history that may be speaking to them as far as the current day situation?
Well, I think people bring their own material to the exhibition and also take away lessons of their own. And we want to leave the room for people, we want to leave the space for people to do that in their own way. But what we try to do is try to use the photographs to link people with organizations that have greater knowledge about the topics in them. So that when people see an image, they can learn more about it. But it's really their choice whether to engage with that or not. There have been some shifts, so nature and environment are categories that are much more prevalent now than they were a couple of years ago.
Yeah. And we're going to be talking about some of those a little later on. Looking at the dynamics of this and going back to allowing people to have their own space and all that, what are the localities? You're saying there's over 100 cities, 4 million people. What are they really getting out of this, and why is it so important to them to have this World Press photo within their own boundaries? In other words, like a Washington, D.C. or New York or Berlin or whatever.
I mean, it's a difficult question. I think every locality has its own reasons, or every organization has its own reasons to want to show the exhibition. Some are much more industry focused, others are much more topic focused. For us in DC, it's a natural thing because the whole policy space is here and you can connect those two worlds. But I think that varies very much from city to city.
So it's whatever it needs to be at that particular time then. So looking at, I mean, this is just really beautifully laid out. So I'm going to go through here because now we're getting to the DC Underground. And so this is a very unique venue because if you look at all these others, and that's why I wanted to share these other scenes from around the globe, is that what something here is quite unique, you know, being in this, you know, this trolley space. So tell us about how you're using that space to its maximum advantage, and we're just about out of time.
Sure. I mean, the space is effectively it's like a single piece of macaroni. It's a semicircle, and you go in the front, and it takes you in a linear way through the space, but you can't quite see where the end of it is. We have 21 projections on the inside wall, and then the single photographs on the outside wall. And people just go through it at their own pace.
Yeah, looking at this, I mean, it's actually it's quite interactive. You know, where you have the slides, you have the photographs, you have, you know, the historical perspective, even using the floor and all this. So looking at this, what do you see for the growth and expansion as far as not only World Press Photo in DC, but around the globe?
I think the interesting thing that's going on right now is the digitization of photography and the stronger influence of film. World Press Photo also has digital storytelling awards that are becoming more and more prevalent. I think that's sort of where the media is going right now.
Yeah. And then going on, the last question, as far as nature, wildlife, the environment, you see that expanding greatly?
Oh yes, as the importance of the topic does, so does the attention it gets.
That's absolutely fantastic. This is Robert W. Mines, founder, World Press Photo Exhibitions here in Washington, D.C., CEO, DC Underground. Thank you for being with us. And thank you for being with us as we look at these magnificent photographs of these world-class photographers as we create the Emerald Planet.
Okay, so we drowned the fire, stirred it, drowned it again, and now just feel if it's cold.
Yeah.
Cool.
Smokey just gave me a bear hug.
I know. I already posted it.
I got a creak in my neck, limp in my step, cramping in my muscles every time I try to flex. I don't know what to get but if you throw me love, I'll throw you some more.
It's a big responsibility.
Oh, it's huge. I know, it's huge.
And the salary.
Oh my god, yes. I mean,
Right?
like, I was about to move in with my parents, and right before, so this saved me.
I really believe in you, you know?
Thank you. It's nice to hear that from someone.
These are cool. Did you, what did you?
we're back to the Emerald Planet. Here again, your host, Dr. Sam.
And thank you for being with us as we look around the globe on a week-to-week basis, looking for what we call the best of the best, or those 1,000 best practices that are making a difference as we move through the 21st century. And as we have many changes as far as the environment is concerned, and also wildlife, nature, and all manner of out of doors as we become a more and more urbanized nation, it's really important that we really bring nature into the urban areas and take people from the urban areas into nature. And we're doing that, as we're going to be discovering here, through photography. And sitting right beside me is Susan Norton. She's the Executive Director of the International League of Conservation Photographers. And welcome to the Emerald Planet.
Thank you, Sam.
Glad to have you with us. Tell us a little bit about the mission and the vision of your organization.
The International League of Conservation Photographers' mission is to support environmental and cultural conservation through ethical filmmaking and photography.
Now, looking at this whole notion of ethical photography and filmmaking, what do you mean by ethical photography and filmmaking?
Well, as you can imagine, if you're photographing wildlife or people or landscapes, you need to respect any of those and all of those and be careful and think about what would be harmful, what is appropriate, and you don't always know what's appropriate. So you have to speak with people who are either taking care of the wildlife, familiar with the wildlife or the landscape, or the actual people that you want to document. You don't want to ever do anything that causes harm or represents things in a way that is not what they are.
Right. And looking at this is from a magazine, so we have this here about the top wildlife, nature, and culture photographers. But looking at this, and we're going to see this, we have people going out into these wilderness areas, some of them for a year at a time, going out and coming back. Many of these are women photographers. But getting this kind of coverage as far as the magazines and all that, why is that so important? Because you are part of the World Press Photo. You have some of your photographers, award winners and all that. But how is all of this reaching out to new and diverse publics through these types of publications?
Well, as you can imagine, when our photographers and filmmakers go out into the field, so often they're working totally alone, in isolation. And these are professionals who are devoting their lives to this work, but if they just take the images and create the images and nothing more is done with them, what purpose does that serve? And so it is critical to get these out through partner organizations, through the media, increasingly through social media, because only when you get them out and you get them out with the appropriate messaging can people understand exactly what we're trying to do, what's at risk, and what can be done.
Now, looking at this photograph, these are absolutely fantastic images, but at the same time, the script is really intriguing and it brings you into the photograph itself. So in the work that you're doing as far as the league itself, how do you balance this as far as the photography, videography, and the script, the narrative that goes along with that?
Well, it's all part of the whole. You can have an incredible image and it's very impactful, but if you don't know the backstory and you don't know what's going on there, it's not going to have nearly the impact as if you have the full story. So that's why having a very strong narrative, having a very succinct narrative, people's attention spans tend to be a bit shorter, especially these days with social media postings. And so you want to get the points across as quickly as possible, but you also want to have the facts that they need to understand what is happening in that image, because without the backstory, you know, it may be an impactful image, but not as impactful.
Yeah, and looking at with the elephants, you know, at the water hole, I mean, this is incredible photograph. You know, again, this is an award winner, of course. But looking at the backstory of this, you know, you look at this, and I think of, you know, Japanese Zen, you know, the pool of no abiding mind and all these other, you know, esoteric and heuristic ideas, and yet you have these magnificent beasts, you know, right in the middle of it. So the photographers, what do they have to go through in order to take this kind of photograph?
A lot of patience, a lot of persistence, and a lot of passion. We say that those three elements are critical. You know, obviously there's a lot of expertise goes into this. You have had to spend a long time not only researching the subjects before you go, but then when you get there, you know, you may have a specific animal that you want to photograph, and you may be there 6 months and you never see it. You know, but in the meantime, you'll get some other stories. But then when you finally get the image that you were searching for all along, you know, it makes it all worthwhile. But you can't be impatient.
Yeah, and the whole thing about it. But you know, you go from these magnificent elephants, you know, that weigh several tons, all the way down to something, the Great Barrier Reef, and you have these tiny little fish and all of that. So it's amazing the diversity, and of course it's the diversity among the photographers themselves. So how do they select themselves, or do they select themselves, or is there something through the league where people can actually take assignments, or how does that really work so that you're really getting balance of nature and habitats across the globe and not excluding anything?
Yeah, it is a very rigorous application process, and so filmmakers and photographers from around the world apply for 2 different levels: emerging league, and those are people early career just starting out, and then associate fellows. And when you've been an associate fellow for 2 years, you can apply to be a senior fellow. So those are the 3 levels. And the selection process is then done by a committee made up of photo editors from around the world. So these are people who know how an image is going to be impactful and what an image needs to do. And so they're the ones who choose the fellows to be part of ILCP.
Now look at this. This is absolutely an incredible photograph, and you're thinking, you know, this has got to be staged, but these are really natural. They're in the wild themselves.
They're ethically
I know, I got it. That's where we're going to all this. But you look at the composition. That's what I wanted to talk about. The composition of this is incredible. And going back to this 6 months you've been there, no alligator, no crocodile, no whatever it is.
Yeah.
But when you get this, I mean, that's absolutely incredible. But the composition of all this, is this something that's intuitive? It's something it just takes years of experience?
Well, first
or
of
how
all,
do you get that?
I'm not a photographer, so I would just like to say that, but I've certainly been around and worked with photographers for decades. There has to be a gut instinct, but there also has to be so much experience, because, you know, in order to get as you said, the composition, in order to get the lighting correct, in order to get the exposure correct, it's just a lot of trial and error over the years. And of course, you know, once digital came in, that was a whole new medium to be explored. But yes, there's always that characteristic of being someone who knows what's going to make a good shot, but then there's the making of the good shot.
Now looking at this, okay, so we've gone from, you know, how we get at taking the photographs, be able to share the story, share the image. Now we're looking at nature itself. And of course, there's dramatic change going on as far as nature is concerned with climate change and the elevations as far as the latitudes, longitude, everything is just really changing. So looking at this, how then the photographers in the league are now becoming storytellers and sharing what the impact that they're actually seeing, because they're there and seeing this. So how do they take these kind of photographs and then translate that to something that people can relate to, really know nothing about nature? They're raised in cities.
Yeah. Well, there's a number of ways that you do it. Often when we put together an expedition, we then create what's known as an Esri story map. Esri being the GIS company, and we partner with them, so we take images, film, photography, maps, and text, and with that create a full view of a topic so that people really do understand, you know, because an image in isolation, as we said earlier, doesn't give you that whole story, but when you put that narrative together, visual storytelling, as I'm sure you know, is a term that is being used a lot, but it's being used because it effectively explains what is being done here.
And the whole thing about this too is just like, you know, putting in this very simple title, Vanishing Act. I mean, you know, as we're losing, what is it, almost 1 million, they're saying, species, both plants and animals that we may be losing, you know, within the next 25, 30 years. So this really says it all, but how can you be so succinct so that people get it just when the first time they see it?
Well, you know, it's interesting because there's a school of thought that the negative images don't necessarily move the dial anymore. That people
People are desensitized
they're
to that.
desensitized, but also they don't want to feel bad all the time. So sometimes you need to see a not so negative image, but that image itself can really be the thing that's going to make the difference for you. You know, whether it's just a glorious landscape or whether it's a really comical looking animal. But if that speaks to you, it's going to make you want to learn more, and then you're going to want to say, well, I understand that that species has some issues right now. What could I do? You know, what small step could I do?
Yeah, it's just like looking at this photograph right here with, you know, the road running through it. You know, people say, well, no big deal, they can go across the road. There's many animals that actually won't go across the road, and you have to put these pathways for people to do that. This is something we're doing, you know, in Brazil, is putting these, as they call, lily pads, so that the species then can start moving.
Yeah.
So again, this is the backstory of this. It looks beautiful and all that, but yet right through the middle of it's a road. How do we convey that? How do the photographers and the backstory convey that type of information that the public really needs to know?
Well, obviously, it's more effective when you can have a series of images. And so some of our photographers, for instance, you're talking about wildlife corridors.
Right.
We have a number of fellows who work with wildlife corridors around the world. And so they, you know, have a body of work that goes year after year, and they build upon that. And so to be able to make people care about that, you know, there's this continuum of information and the images that go with it. I mean, you can have really important scientific data, but we all know that if you can put that one image that just, you know, knocks you upside the head and makes you think, that's what they're talking about. I think that's the critical part.
And we're about out of time, but we have to have teams that work together, people that communicate. I'm going to leave this up here. What do you see for the growth and development as far as such photographers and their willingness to communicate and share with others to get the story out?
Well, it's critical because, again, even though they often work alone on certain projects, they know that they have to work with other organizations and others with different expertise in order to really get the story out there.
Yeah. Well, this is Susan Norton, Executive Director, International League of Conservation Photographers. Thank you for being with us. And as we see, there are many females that are doing this as we create the Emerald Planet.
Every time I hear the alarm bell go off in school, I think it's an air raid.
A lot of houses in our neighborhood have been destroyed. I like to close my ears and sing songs whenever the bombs come close.
I'm worried our new neighbors won't like us.
But I know it's all gonna be worth it. I just want my family to be safe. But these are not my words.
These are not my words.
These are not my words.
One day these rats were playing in the woods. Wanted some matches and that's no good. Yeah. Listen to smoke before you give it a try. Only you. Don't play with matches. Don't play with fire. Cause there's nothing very funny about nothing very nice on a homeless mind. So if a gorgeous force is what you desire, don't play with matches. Don't play with fire. Yeah.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Fire.
How far would you go to protect the planet?
I want you to build an ark.
Here we go. Okay, that's good. Oh, okay. Ow!
Maybe there's another way.
People, the flood is imminent!
Is it too much to ask for a little precipitation?
Go to fightglobalwarming.com to find out what you and your community can do to reduce global warming pollution.
When it comes to saving money,
What?
don't act like a baby.
Oh, it's like they're having their own little meeting. This is so humiliating.
Be the boss.
I'm the boss.
What the?
Power nap.
You were saying?
And make a budget.
Let's get to work.
Need a little help?
Stacy, read back the notes.
I can't read.
What's it say?
Create a personalized savings plan and get other tools and tips
We can share.
You obviously didn't go to business school.
at feedthepig.org.
We're back to the Emerald Planet. Here again, your host, Dr. Sam.
Thank you for being with us as we're talking about photography as a way to reach out to new audiences, to convey ideas that sometimes are very difficult if people are just reading about it, even seeing it on the internet and looking at the visuals there. There's something different about photography that people can slow down, really absorb that image, and try to interpret it for themselves. Not only just look at the backstory to hear the narrative that's been written by someone else, but what does that really mean to them? And the person sitting right beside me actually does a great amount of work at that. This is Susan Norton. She's the Executive Director of the International League of Conservation Photographers. And looking at the photographs is just incredible as far as the way that people with their cameras are interpreting that scene and then trying to convey that to many others. So looking at the profession itself, what type of person is willing to go out and sit in a blind, be in the jungle, fight mosquitoes, snakes, crocodiles, alligators to get that one prize photograph? What kind of personality does that take?
It takes someone who has an extreme dedication to wanting to make a difference, and they have decided that their photography or their filmmaking is the way that they can do that. So our fellows are all professionals who are working in areas that they're often working in isolation. But they do this because they feel like they have to do it. You know, they're not going to buy a yacht with what they make from this work, but they feel so passionately that they have to do this work. And so they do it, and they have to be patient, and they have to be persistent. And at the end of the day, they believe that image will indeed make a difference.
Mm-hmm. But the whole thing about it is that when you go out to this type of terrain, you have to be tough. You have to be physically fit.
Right.
So looking at that, they talk about the dedication, they want to make a difference as far as the world is concerned. Mm-hmm. But what keeps driving them, you know, when it's not easy, you're not exactly getting the photograph that you want, nature is conspiring against you with rain and mudslides and all these other things. And I've actually, you know, been in these situations and gone through it. So how do they have that tenacity to keep moving forward? And this is across, you know, your various fellows, no matter what level.
Yeah, no, I think that you know, I don't know what personality test would show you what that conveys, but it definitely is somebody who knows that it's going to be tough. This is not an easy life that they have, and they just, you know, it's a certain type of person. As you said, you know, when you're in a blind or when you're up in the tree canopy or, you know, whatever situation, it's not the easiest life in the world, but they have decided that this is what they have to do with their lives.
Yeah. Looking at this photograph, these are people that, you know, day to day, you know, majority of the 7.3 billion people on planet Earth, you know, living in these kinds of conditions. Yet, you know, if we're in the urban areas of the United States, Western Europe, some places in Asia, you know, we forget about, you know, there's about 3.5 billion people out there that have a very tough life. So looking at the photographers, the ones that are going out looking for assignments, how do they actually say, I want to embrace this, I want to get down to, you know, the majority of the people on planet Earth and tell their stories? How does that happen?
I think a lot of it happens by them going out and doing, you know, either the first work that they do, whether it's an assignment or something they do on their own, and getting to know people and then learning the stories. I mean, the reason that cultural conservation is in ILCP's mission statement, not just environmental, but cultural conservation.
And we want to talk about that as our next question.
Because there's almost no environmental story that doesn't have the human element as part of that. And so, you know, they may go out to study a certain species, but once they meet the people in the surrounding areas and find out more about them and the impact that this world has on them, you know, that just makes them want to learn even more and document those people even more.
Yeah, and looking at with the butterflies that we see right here in this very you know, rural area, there's something that really is almost like a magnet to some people that want to be out there and enjoy and convey this information, because, you know, we have the people here, they're doing their day-to-day work, and just right down the river you see this type of scene. So how do they mesh this together so that you really get the total story? Yes, it's tough, sometimes it's backbreaking, but at the same time it's incredibly beautiful, and people just love to be in their own natural terrain.
Well, I think the one thing to remember is that if you just show one side of something, it isn't giving the full journalistic picture, literally picture. And so our fellows believe that's important to show all the elements, and, you know, to show the things that are surprising, but also the things that help you connect, like seeing people doing their laundry, no matter where that is or how that is, it gives us a connection to them. So just showing people doing their day-to-day life, wherever that is, under whatever circumstances, but then showing the nature that they're so privileged to have right nearby. You know, it just gives that fuller picture and makes people want to know more about who are these people, what is this butterfly, you know, what's going on in that river.
You know, and looking at this, as far as this withered corn, this is really the next step of that, is that many of your journalists and photographers are now really dedicated to the environment, looking at climate change, the impact it's having on people, as we're just seeing right here. And so they're really interpreting, translating, but also capturing these images, that it's really getting more and more difficult out here as far as making a living. And of course now there's almost 70 million people on the planet Earth that either are refugees or internally displaced people. And a lot of these are environmental refugees are being called. That's not officially the title, but internally displaced people. And when you see this kind of scene, you understand what is really being faced out there. So how are they taking this, and again, looking at those butterflies, the people doing their wash, now we're moving to their livelihood and the sustenance, because many of these people do eat corn, potatoes. How do we take all that, put it and package it so people have, again, going back to that total story?
It's interesting, we have a fellow based in Australia, and he's very much about the words that we use for these issues. And he said, you know, climate change, people are just glazing over now. And he calls it climate destruction. He said or climate emergency, because if you just talk about this phrase, climate change, people are like, well, change, is it always bad? You know, what's going on with change? And he said, until we start using words that make it the dire situation it is. So that's one element of it, is how we frame things. And then also, you know, we have a fellow who photographed time-lapse for years of glaciers disappearing. You know, when you see that with the naked eye, you can't help but realize something's going on here, and what will the impact of that be? And so when we then photograph the people, the landscapes, and the species, and put that all together and say, well, here's what's happening. You know, we're talking about glaciers receding, but what does that mean? You know, just to take the photos of the glaciers receding. Just like this corn,
withered corn, the drought.
Like what happened here, you know, and what will this mean all the way down the line? You know, what does it mean, you know, when you have a plant that suddenly becomes extinct? Well, what is going on with the whole pollination cycle, if that's something that's involved pollinators, you know, and what about the people? What are they going to subsist on now? So, you know, every story leads you down different trails.
Yeah, and you know, you look at this and you say the natural beauty of all this, but at the same time, you know, with climate change, all of this is really changing as far as, you know, severe storms, weatherization, washing away topsoil. lack of, land that actually can be, farmed and all that. So, I mean, it gets down to, these people living in this kind of condition, and, from where they are as far as nature is concerned. So how do we move forward as far as the conservation photographers, going back to the title that you have there, looking at that as how does that get translated then to the general public to make sure that people understand it's real. It's just like this climate destruction phraseology, from your Australian colleague. And we need to start using more dynamic descriptors of what's really going on, I think.
Well, obviously, it's very important to have partners. So we work with many different conservation organizations around the world. We work with government agencies. We work with local groups, community groups, to use all the different communications vehicles. If it's in a local community, you want, first of all, for them to know that you respect them and what's going on with them, and that you want to understand that you're not bringing our Western mentality to it. Right. And then when you're working with NGOs, many of them have various communication tools to get out. We give presentations all over the world. We have exhibitions all over the world. Again, social media. There are just so many tools now, and you have to use them all. Because when you've got these impactful images, you just want them to get out there and really be able to tell the story, and hopefully people will stop and notice and say, well, what can I do about that?
Yeah, and looking at this photograph right here, and these ladies, again, in very dire situation, we're being challenged all over the globe, but yet we still have to have a certain sensitivity and respect for all that. So looking at this photograph, the photographer's done an absolutely fantastic job. The contrasts and colors, everything, the surrounding. But how do we do that with compassion and respect? I think that's very important, but how do we do that? And we have one more question after that.
Well, the main thing is that when one of our fellows goes in a community, it's important, first of all, to explain why they're there and what they hope to do, but then to ask, is that okay? Is there anything that you're not comfortable with me documenting? In some cultures, it's not allowed for them to document the actual people.
Yeah, so you can't even take the photograph.
Right, so you have to know those parameters, and your research in advance isn't necessarily going to give you those answers. Right. So you have to get there, establish relationships. You don't go in the first day and start photographing. Right. It's all about getting to know people and gaining their trust, and then saying, this is what I want to do. Is this okay with you?
Yeah. Moving forward, we have all this destruction as far as the climate change. About 15 seconds. How are your photographers really handling this personally and conveying that information? You've got to be quick.
They are all over the world documenting the most pressing conservation issues and trying to create images that will make a difference with people around the world.
Susan Norton being with me as we create the Emerald Planet.
I surrender.
All right, pal. Get ready for the day, buddy.
Hey, Dad. Hey, Dad. Do we have a gun?
What's that?
Do we have a gun?
Maybe you can make retirement happen. After all, you made this vacation happen.
Double points with every purchase?
Cleverly merging promotions.
I love it.
Cross-referencing travel sites. And booking all your flights with those...
vouchers. I got us bumped.
They were like, oh. But now they're like... Aloha. You aced this vacation. Now get the tips you need to get on track at aceyourretirement.org.
I tried Oxy at a couple of parties. I thought I had it under control. I didn't know it'd be this addictive. I didn't know how far I'd go to get more.
Opioid dependence can happen after just 5 days. Know the truth, spread the truth.
what to expect when you're expecting
Like here.
a teenager.
Today, I'm going to show you how to teen-proof your home. First step, hide the car keys. Preferably somewhere they would never look. Challenges will come up. Be ready for them. Hi, honey.
Ready for the... Mom, you don't use mannequins in the mannequin challenge.
You don't have to know it all to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care will love you just the same.
We're back to the Emerald Planet. Here again, your host, Dr. Sam.
Thank you for being with us as we come to you on a week-to-week basis from Washington, D.C. in the United States as we look around the globe in 144 different nations, looking for those 1,000 best practices, technology, services, products, and the people, of course, that are making a difference as we move through the 21st century. I'm Dr. Sam Hancock, the President and Executive Director of Emerald Planet, creator and host for the Emerald Planet TV. And I have right beside me Robert W. Mines. He's the founder of World Press Photo Exhibitions in Washington, D.C., and also the CEO of DC Underground. And we're looking at photography as a means of communicating the natural world and everything, whether it's climate change, whether it's wildlife, it's all of nature around us. Why are photographers so important to communicate this to a public that actually spends most of their time on either, a cell phone or in front of a computer screen?
Well, it sounds a little trite, but I've been to a convenience store before and wanted to pick up some eggs and have a small child sitting next to me and asking their parents where the eggs came from, not understanding that they come from chickens. When you live in a certain environment, you have a certain amount of information that you understand, and it's limited to that. Photographers go out all over the world and collect incredible images that speak to people's imaginations, and they get people thinking about the world around them.
Now, looking at this is something seems very serene, yet critically important. You have the wildlife in a wheelbarrow. And you talked about how to captivate people's minds and how to bring them into it. Looking at this photograph, what could more attract you than these faces in this situation? Because it's almost incongruent that you have all this wildlife in one spot, just riding along in a wheelbarrow.
Well, what the photograph does very effectively is it sort of connects the natural world with the human one, because those faces might as well be of children in a wheelbarrow.
Right.
And it gets you thinking a little bit about what the links are between the two, and understanding that there isn't such a big difference between what we consider nature out there and what we are as human beings. It's just a matter of how you look at it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but it really takes, it's just like this one here, the jumping off is, these are incredible photographs, but it shows the animals almost as human beings. Yeah. And again, that's what you're saying, is that this bridge between the beings, whether it's plant, animals, or humans, it's not that much different as far as how we react to our natural surroundings. So looking at the photographers that you have in World Press Photograph, why is that so important that we actually be able to communicate that connection between the natural world, the animals that are a part of that, and we humans actually connecting into that, not necessarily nature and animals connecting into us?
Well, it's because this is the world that we live in, whether we know it or not, or whether we interact with these animals or not. Mm-hmm. They are there, and our actions impact their world. By showing the link between the two, people start to understand that when we do something that impacts their world negatively, that has a negative consequence for us as well. And I think that's what makes it so vital that these images come out, because we realize how amazing the world is, and again, that these animals are not out there, but they are part of the same system that we're part of.
Yeah, and and the whole thing about this one right here, where you're taking your work home with you. You have this small elephant, actually on your couch.
Yeah.
So, this is something that's very intimate. So going to the nature of photography and this connection between the natural world, the animals, and the humans in that, how does that photographer sensitize the viewer to become part of that. So it's not just, oh, I see this photograph and they just keep moving on, but that they really do start to connect.
Well, I think the photograph that you're showing, which is by Amy Vitale, is a tremendous example of this. Here's someone who is used to conflict photography, went over to nature photography, and from my perspective, creates some of the most captivating images that show the love between, in this case, the elephant keepers and their charges. The strength of that link communicates to us the strength of the link that we should have with nature and that others do have with nature. And I think showing that breaks down barriers.
Yeah, and this is really interesting. You bring up the name of the photographer and the fact that, you know, in essence going into war zones, which is very brutal, then moving into nature. But there's many of those techniques there because you have to bridge, you know, that divide between a very urbanized society living in a built environment, almost completely out of any nature whatsoever outside of some trees and gardens and things like that. But yet there's skills that you have to have that communicate, you know, what is happening in this war zone and the impacts, what is happening in nature and the impacts. How do you think those skills will transfer for future generations as far as how to learn the craft, but then to be able to communicate something this audacious that we're seeing right here, and at the same time allow people to be part of it?
Well, it's been discussed before. Visual storytelling is not just something that you do based on a certain topic. It's something that you do with any kind of image, whether it's digital, whether it's analog, whether it's a still image, or whether it's a moving image. You're telling a story. What we are doing also with the exhibition is, together with the DC Rotary Club, reaching out to different schools like Richard Wright, organizing classes with professional photojournalists who are able to teach the skills, to encourage people to tell their own visual stories. And then connecting that with the exhibition, showing the work of professional photographers, so that kids can understand the beginnings of how you become a visual storyteller.
Yeah, and this is, you know, this is really a poignant scene here as far as the animal that's being cared for and all that, and there's certain amount of tenderness and affection that you actually see here. You know, this is an animal that's going to be, you know, cared for. But at the same time, they're trying to lessen its anxiety. How do we do that? How do we explain that? And just like talking about the students, you know, at the arts and the performing arts school, is how do they learn that craft before they ever get out of high school, and then they can move forward in such a profession?
Well, for me, the great thing about this image is actually that it is interpreted differently by different people. People will step up to this image and think that either the animal is very ill or is going to be put down, or that has something wrong with its eyes. And when you read the caption beside it, you start understanding what's actually going on. But that simple act of having an image not be entirely clear at first glance gets people to start thinking about it, and gets people halfway down that path of understanding what a process is when it comes to the capturing of an animal like this, the treating of an animal, and the releasing of an animal like this. And that's kind of the story that you want to see them continue to take out of the exhibition, learning a little bit more about the images that they see.
And being sensitized. Now, this is something you think, you know, this is a war zone, you know, this is really a terrible situation, but yet this person is all part of nature, protecting nature, actually protecting the villages that are actually trying to take care of these animals that we've actually just been looking at. So bridging this as far as photography, how do we go beyond just the gun, the camouflage, to understand this is somebody that's really taking care of nature in a very real and physical manner?
Well, again, this is a very beautiful example of a very powerful image. This woman is standing there with an automatic rifle. The backstory is that she is one of the members of a female anti-poaching team, one of the first in Africa. But the way that this photograph communicates is through its immense power, and it makes you wonder: okay, is this a guerrilla? Is this someone who is fighting against the government? Is this a combat in some way? And then you learn, no, that's not the case. This is someone who is literally taking care of animals on a daily basis. Which is it's one of my favorite photographs.
And this is an award winner. But getting over to as far as nature is concerned and providing food for the future, as we go to 9 billion people on planet Earth by 2038, they're saying, is that we really need to be thinking about this. So this is really way beyond as far as nature and the animals and all that. But at the same time, is this person is really caring for her natural environment, but also for really tens of thousands of other people as they're figuring out ways to produce more food for the future.
Yeah, and I think an image like this, that problem is not just based on food, it's also based on our proclivities as human beings to use horns for medicinal or other purposes. It's a difficult balance. I mean, I worked for the UN on food issues for a long time. None of these things are simple. None of these are black and white issues. You always have to find a balance between what's sustainable to do with nature and to nature, and how you reinvest in nature to make sure that stays as it ought to be.
Yeah, and then as this young boy, being out in the countryside. I mean, this is really a forlorn place. But this is where our food is coming from. We have to protect it. We have to take care of it. So how are these photographs quite different than what we've seen, with the animals and all that, but moving towards human beings interacting within nature itself? How does this help us to understand what is out there, something we may never touch in our lifetime, but yet there's many people that do?
I think a picture like this humanizes the people who bring us our food. We're used to seeing things as a corporate process that just ends up with magically, voila, we have
big
food
box.
on our plate. Exactly.
Big box.
Exactly. And it's important to understand that there are people behind this, and those people face challenges. Those people have stories. And I think that's the power of a graphic like this. I think it's amazing.
Yeah, this is the one that we actually kind of breaks your heart, but this is what's happening in the ocean, is where we're losing so much, as far as any kind of sea life out there. And most of this is caused by humans, even though we're saying, well, humans may or may not interact negatively with the environment. But this really shows you how it is a negative interaction. How do we take this? And this is an award-winning photograph. We'll go out on this.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite images from last year. It's not only does it show the amount of plastic and pollution that we're putting into the oceans, it also shows its direct impact. So this sea turtle has a net around its neck. The good part of the story is that the divers afterwards freed it. But you need to understand what happens when nets get loose in the ocean. It has an impact.
Yeah. But the beauty of nature, photography, beauty of nature, communicating that, what do we see? And we got about 5 seconds.
What do we see?
Yeah.
Oh, we see people coming to an exhibition like this and taking away lessons, learning more about nature and reinvesting that in nature.
As we create the Emerald Planet.